Inside, German officers huddled around a table covered with maps, debating troop movements, supply depots, and the best positioning of artillery batteries. They felt safe here, shielded by miles of anti-aircraft defenses and the thick canopy above. But as they eagerly pored over the plans to blunt the impending Allied invasion, hellfire from the blue was about to shatter their illusion of security. It began with a barely audible hum, swelling rapidly into an unholy growl which seemed to shake the very roots of the dense forest floor. Before anyone could react, a blinding flash engulfed the tent. The fiery blast ripped through the canvas, maps and the bodies alike, spraying pink mist into every direction. A thunderous, monotone growl followed the murderous cacophony as it faded into oblivion. Paralyzed and panicking guards stared at where their command tent once stood. Its smoldering debris now filled the air with the acrid smell of burned fuel and flesh. The Nazis didn't know what hit them. Peeling up into the clouds above them was an A-10 Thunderbolt, one of the world's deadliest ground attack aircraft. Only this one had somehow been sent back in time to raise hell over the skies of Europe. Could a fully loaded A-10 have made the difference for Allied forces at the height of World War II? Join us on today's episode of the Infographic Show to find out. Dawn's early light glinted off the dark rolling waves of the English Channel as a squadron of Republic P-47 Thunderbolts approached. The cagey ground-pouring workhorse of the Allied air forces cruised low over the water, their bulbous 18-cylinder radial engines rumbling. The pilots, veterans of countless sorties, climbed high into the air as they approached the French coastline ahead, scanning the skies for signs of enemy activity. Something off to the right, 3 o'clock high. The flight lead crackled into his throat mic. In perfect unison, each of the pilots flying in the V glanced up over their right shoulders, straining to make sense of the gray shape coming into view. They could make out 2 shimmering orbs in the pre-dawn darkness. It was an aircraft, that much was certain. Yet it was one that looked much more like a spaceship than anything they'd ever seen back in England. The rearward jet engines almost whispered compared to the P-47's roaring radials. "Hold your fire," the flight lead said, looking over the snub-nosed behemoth. Its wings were absurdly short and straight, swept back ever so slightly, carrying an impressive array of pods and bombs. It had a glass orb canopy not unlike their P-47s, and a massive frontal cannon that looked like a Civil War-era Gatling gun on steroids. "I think he's one of ours," the flight lead said warily. As he climbed upwards, leveling out next to the mysterious airframe, it bobbed its wings back, a welcome sign. Amazingly, as it did so, the flight lead made out the same unmistakable black and white invasion stripes as those on his own wings. Inside the strange cockpit, staring dumbfounded back at the squadron of P-47s, sat Captain Ray "Dusty" Mason. Just minutes before, he had been in Colorado flying a routine training exercise, until suddenly he wasn't. He couldn't explain it. One moment he'd been flying over a Colorado 14er, and the next he was buzzing over a huge body of water, a flotilla of sleek olive-green P-47s off his A-10's left wing. Dusty wondered if he was in a simulation. The approaching coastline looked like the coastline of France that he'd seen so often during his days as a commercial pilot, before joining the U.S. Air Force. Throttling back, Dusty's combat instincts kicked in. The lead pilot of the famous P-47 Thunderbolt, the spiritual forebear of his own Thunderbolt II, seemed to be inspecting his airframe. Keying their radio, Dusty picked up the right frequency and decided to play along.
"Good morning, gentlemen,"
he said with a thick Texas drawl, wagging his wings to make sure they knew he wasn't a threat. Then he took an absurd punt, partially in jest.
"I have been authorized by Eisenhower himself to accompany you on your mission today,"
he said, half expecting a stern reply. Only they seemed to take the bait, saluting Dusty as they flew past, their eyes wide as saucers. They'd seen the famous shark's mouth painted on some of their own fighters, but never on anything like this. It had to be one of those secret jet programs they'd heard rumors about. They knew the Germans were developing them. They didn't know the Allies already had some of their own. Crossing the French coast, the P-47s broke off into pairs. The A-10 stayed on the wing of the flight leader, a grizzled veteran named Major Slick White. He explained their mission to Dusty. They were on their way to pound German armor in a bid to slow the rush of Panzer columns before they could charge in to crush the growing Allied beachhead in Normandy. What the P-47 pilots didn't know was that the mysterious newcomer alongside them wasn't just strange, it was terrifyingly lethal. First, have you ever had a brilliant idea for a video but felt stuck because you didn't know where to start? Meet NVIDIA AI V3, the tool that'll help you communicate your ideas irrespective of what skill level you're at. Unlike traditional tools that can feel overwhelming, NVIDIA AI puts you in the director's seat, making the entire video creation process seamless, while it does the heavy lifting. Just type in your idea, whether it's a recipe, a commercial, or even a trailer for a movie that doesn't exist, and watch as InVideo AI transforms it into a full-length video. With text-based commands, you can customize every detail. Want to add a voiceover or change the language? Just type it in. You can even clone your own voice for narration. The year was 1978. Ted Bundy had been terrorizing the nation for years. InVideo AI isn't just a tool, it's your creative partner, and you can try it right now for free, saving you hundreds of dollars on editing and stock footage. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description to bring your ideas to life with InVideo AI V3. The A-10 was perfect for the task, affectionately referred to as a Warthog. The almost invincible tank buster specialized in tearing through armored columns and fortified positions. It was designed, 30 years into the future, at the height of the Cold War for this exact task, in order to shred Soviet T-74s pouring across the Fulda Gap. The A-10's engineers basically built out its world-famous airframe around its distinctly American ace in the hole, the WWII Avenger. This 7-barrel 30mm Gatling cannon was capable of firing up to 70 rounds a second, or 4,200 rounds a minute. Though the plane itself only carried under 1,200 rounds, each was armor-piercing, depleted uranium. They were capable of punching through an entire tank column like butter, leaving nothing but twisted metal and fire in its wake. To put that into perspective, the A-10's gun is so powerful that when its pilot presses the trigger, the recoil alone unleashes 10,000 pounds of force, slightly more than the output of each of its two TF-34 turbofan engines. This effectively cuts the plane's airspeed in half, and there's only one way to counteract the recoil: throw the old girl into a shallow dive. So you're not only pitching up and down like you're on a wild roller coaster, you're riding the world's most powerful bull at the same time. Dusty wasn't there simply to make mincemeat with his cannon. His A-10 was loaded out with 16,000 pounds of American firepower, AGM-65 Maverick missiles, high-explosive bombs, and incendiary cluster munitions. This humble hog had the power to dismantle bunkers, artillery positions, and large concentrations of enemy troops with surgical precision. The A-10 pilots are known for flying low and slow to identify targets. They routinely devastate ground forces by threading between buildings, weaving through valleys, and attacking from angles enemies don't expect. In one legendary mission during the Gulf War, an A-10 pilot destroyed over 20 Iraqi vehicles in a single day, obliterating supply lines and leaving enemy troops paralyzed. Combined with its heavy armor and redundancy systems that allow it to survive even with severe damage, his airframe was truly a flying tank that refused to be taken down. But that was all still 50 years into the future. Dusty felt a tinge of nervousness in his throat. This was wartime France at the height of World War II, and he was about to enter the hornet's nest. It was now dawn, a bright sunrise revealing a luscious Norman countryside pockmarked by craters and debris. The invasion was on. The Thunderbolts were headed north to a series of villages north of Paris. British intelligence had pinpointed the bulk of Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's Army Group B, the greatest threat to the landing forces themselves, in this area. There were 9 Panzer divisions and 1 Panzer Grenadier division in the whole theater. An armored reserve known as Panzer Group West had more than 1,400 tanks and self-propelled guns. Slick White, the lead P-47 pilot, explained that the Germans had kept their best armor inland, hidden for a mass counterattack. Allied spies operating in the underground French resistance had passed along accurate intelligence as to their exact whereabouts. Allegedly, the German panzers were staging for an upcoming inspection by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself. If so, their ceremony was about to be turned into a good old-fashioned American turkey shoot. A minute out from the target, the Thunderbolts prepared for their initial strafing run. They would dive at a little over 400 miles per hour, maxing out the speed of their P-47s. Ironically, despite being 3 decades newer, the sheer bulk of the A-10 gave it a top speed comparable to the P-47s. This was because the cockpit, referred to as the bathtub, was protected by 1,200 pounds of pure titanium. It boasted double redundant hydraulic systems with manual reversion control in case the plane was hit. There was also a thick internal shield of multi-layer nylon spall and armored fuselage panels composed of titanium plates up to 1.5 inches thick. And not forgetting the 16,000 pounds of ordnance. Coming down out of a series of wispy clouds, Dusty could not believe his eyes. Ripples of morning sunlight casting long shadows over a wide open field, where he saw what looked like an entire panzer division lined up in pristine order. Rows upon rows of Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IIIs and IVs gleamed, freshly painted and meticulously maintained for review. The French underground had been right. Hundreds of Panzer Grenadiers milled about on the grounds, standing at attention. But the rumble of engines overhead shattered the morning calm. Dozens of American P-47 Thunderbolts and, at the helm, a single monstrous A-10 Thunderbolt II cut through the air, injecting fear and panic into the Nazi procession. Dusty watched as the P-47s dove first, roaring in low and fast. From their wings, 500-pound bombs whistled down into columns of armor, erupting in blinding fireballs and sending German soldiers scrambling for cover. Rockets tore through rows of panzers, their blasts flinging turret covers and treads skyward. Panzer Grenadiers scurried desperately for the tree line. 50-caliber bullets raked across the field, cutting down vehicles, supplies, and anyone unfortunate enough to be caught out in the open. Amid the chaos, one P-47 took a direct hit from the flak batteries, now firing as fast as they could, and it spiraled down in flames. Dusty internalized the risk in his head. It did not deter him. No Luftwaffe fighters challenged the Americans. The skies were theirs. Now it was the A-10's turn. Dusty lined up his sights on the vast assembly of tanks stretched before him. It was the type of juicy target all A-10 pilots dreamed of. A literal dream scenario for an airframe expressly designed to this very end. Row upon row, all packed in like sardines in a can. Dusty's eyes lit up as he squeezed the trigger on the GAU-8 Avenger. The cannon roared to life, an anachronistic sound even by 1944 standards. A monstrous buzzing growl. The recoil rocked the A-10 as the 30mm depleted uranium shells ripped through the panzers like paper. Dusty came around 3 more times, using his AGM missiles and cluster munitions to eviscerate tanks. Tigers and Panthers were shredded as they exploded in spectacular fireballs. When the dust settled, columns of black smoke rose from the field, littered with the wreckage of what had once been one of Germany's prized panzer divisions. The Allies had claimed the field in a single devastating strike, leaving Rundstedt's armor in ruins. The day, in truth, was only just getting started. By the end of the day, Dusty and Slick's Thunderbolts would return to France 2 more times. The damage they inflicted had been so stark, unfolded so quickly, that they could not accurately verify the enemy's losses. Soon, word came through that they had rendered an entire panzer division combat ineffective. That morning surprise attack north of Paris delivered not only a crucial tactical victory, but a seismic psychological shockwave that rippled up the German command chain. Losing a key division set aside for Rommel's Fortress Europe defenses forced the German command to rethink their Normandy strategy. Hitler, who had placed immense faith in these heavy divisions to counter any landing force, was for once visibly shaken. Seeing his finest panzers obliterated from the air made him deeply wary of committing further armor into what was now clearly a death trap. Who knew the extent to which this new Allied Wunderwaffen could alter their fortunes on the battlefield? Begrudgingly, panzer reinforcements across France were delayed and dispersed. They were left idling far from the front lines at the precise moment when frontline forces needed every tank and gun they could spare. This unexpected advantage accelerated the Allied breakthrough in Normandy, shaving weeks off of what would have been a grueling and bloody battle through the Bocage. Allied forces advanced more swiftly into the French countryside, avoiding prolonged stalemates that had once seemed inevitable. The capture of Cherbourg, the closest major port, followed quickly, an invaluable supply line that would have otherwise taken fierce fighting and cost thousands of Allied lives. With the panzer threat effectively nullified, the Allies no longer needed Operation Cobra, an ambitious plan spearheaded by an immense aerial bombardment intended to punch a hole through the German lines. The Thunderbolt's single strike saved weeks of brutal close-quarters combat, preserved Allied momentum, and helped ensure the success of the entire Normandy campaign. What began as a daring airstrike had reshaped the course of the invasion. Dusty's A-10 joyride with the greatest generation, however, did not last long. Weeks after the Normandy invasion, Captain Ray Dusty Mason found himself once again in his A-10 over the skies of Germany. This time, the hunters became the hunted. Dusty's wingman spotted a menacing formation of prop-driven Focke-Wulf FW-190s and 2 jet-powered Me-262s zeroing in on their position. Dusty knew his Warthog made him the ugly duckling and the enemy's chief target. The German pilots had their prize in sight. The P-47 escorts found themselves outmaneuvered and outpaced, unable to shake the enemy's focus from the futuristic behemoth in their midst. Within moments, the air was filled with the thunder of cannon fire as the FW-190s and Me-262s closed in. Dusty could feel the relentless pounding as rounds tore through his fuselage, shredding control surfaces and splintering the metal skin. Shrapnel rattled around outside his cockpit, some of it embedding into the bathtub's plating surrounding him. Forced onto the deck, Dusty pushed the Warthog to skim the treetops, dragging the Germans through the valleys and towns. His desperate attempt at evasion carried on for almost an hour. With his plane taking even more damage, Dusty tried to pull up sharply, buying time for him to release his plane's countermeasures. The Luftwaffe pilots had never seen such advanced chaff, fiery objects drifting from the A-10's fuselage. One veered off, disoriented, while the other attempted to follow the Warthog's climb. Eventually, his faithful A-10, now riddled with holes, could hold out no longer. With grim resolve, Dusty made the call, climbing just high enough to bail out over occupied France. As he drifted down, he spotted a small farmhouse below. In 5 days' time, the French underground would find him. A few days later, one would guide him back to Allied lines. Weeks later, Dusty climbed into the cockpit of a P-47 Thunderbolt. Its simple, sturdy controls were a welcome contrast to the high-tech A-10 he had lost. As he took off, he glanced down at the fields below, where remnants of his Warthog's final journey remained scattered, a haunting reminder of the mission that had turned the tide of the war. As Slick and the other Jug pilots circled and formed up on his wing, Dusty imagined what a squadron of A-10s could have done against the Nazi war machine. Sure, it wasn't the fastest or the most fleet of foot, even by the standards of World War II. And sure, a fleet of Warthogs wouldn't have won the entire war on their own. With time to operate over a target-rich battlefield, their ground attack prowess and relentless firepower could have given the Allies a faster, less bloody path to victory. If the A-10 Warthog fought in World War II, which battle should it hit first? How much impact would it make? Share your thoughts below. Now go check out What If a Single F-22 Time Traveled to Germany During World War II, or click on this video instead.